Well, what we were talking about.
Yes,
Um,
yes, we need to repeat our
okay.
conversation. Welcome, comrades. Today I am with comrade from United States because of security reasons. We have conspiration, and the comrade from USA have a lot of good ideas how to rebuild the communist movement in the world. So I am listening to you.
That's an interesting way to put it. So I have some good ideas about how to rebuild the communist movement in the world. Okay. um, one thing I want to precise now that we're recording this is that I'm speaking also understand from the perspective in the United States. So, but the premise, as we were talking about, is that I think that the movement in general, various movements within very different settings and condition with different conditions, we need to draw from each other. Given the fact that modes of production are now global, if not mostly global, but beside being nationally organized, also internationally, so has the struggle to be organized internationally, which doesn't mean to recreate that which has existed until the Third International. But what we were talking about is that in the what I would call the anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist struggle, um, you have multitudes of progressive voices that are not necessarily Marxist, no Marxist-Leninist, who come from very different tradition. Um, and that has been the main focus of a lot of left struggle in the United States, be it for equal rights for men and women, for people of various sexual orientations, uh, equalities in terms of rights for different ethnicities, different nationalities, and so on. And the issue is that the struggles are mostly struggles of resistance that never bring about the idea of what kind of world are we going to live in once capitalism has been displaced, once power has been taken. And to introduce the idea that socialism is not just a goal, that it's something to be constructed. And like a French communist said, we need to take socialism from under the rubbles of the Berlin Wall. Namely, that we have to resurrect the very idea that socialism, the idea of socialism, is not just anti capitalism. It's also to create a better world, a better society, a more equitable society, and a more just society that takes into account the welfare of the people once and for all, not just as an addendum, not just as a sort of an outcome that would be of benefits to the people, but as an objective. And that basically socialism can create wealth for the people, public wealth, of course, not so much private wealth, but for the group, for the collective, for society at large, socialism can create a good life. And that has to be the objective, the good life, not just the struggle against capitalism. I think that, and here I'll speak from a more professional perspective, but people struggle in daily life. They have a hard time to make ends meet. The insecurities economically, particularly because of COVID, and they suffer the consequences of capitalism on a daily basis. As you mentioned, inflation. Here is Christmas time. You have very little money. You want to offer your kids gifts for Christmas, but everything is expensive, overly expensive. And this is not new, as you know, and every 7 to 10 years we have these cycles of these crises, and then things go haywire for people and life gets harder and harder. And then if that's not the case, then we have austerity measures implemented by supranational entities such as the EU or the FMI, the monetary fund, international monetary fund, and so on. And in the end, people suffer from the effect and the consequences, the inevitable consequences of what I call capitalism as it is supposed to function. And so you have very depressed people, not just economically, but even psychologically. Then you're going to try to engage them by telling them, you see, the suffering you have is a cause of capitalism. Well, they do know that in practice, not in theory, but now we're going to have a theory of their depression. They suffer from inflation, they suffer from inequalities, they suffer from low wages, they suffer from not the guarantee of having a good job, they suffer from the possibility of losing not just employment, but housing and so on. And then you say, well, you see, you're losing the possibility of losing your job, losing your home, not having enough money is a cause of capitalism. That's depressing. It's very depressing. Namely, to tell somebody you're depressed because of this does not take away the depression. So what I'm saying is that, and that's maybe, that may seem stupid from a political economical standpoint, but one of the role I would imagine of the party is to resurrect hope into something. People, it's one thing to struggle to have a higher salary. It's one thing to struggle for a better job. It's one thing to struggle to try to make sure you are not going to lose your homes, the apartment where you live. It's exhausting. And when you were talking about the yellow vest, you can see a deep discontent. Namely, these people were not particularly political, who were sort of disenfranchised from the political scene. They no longer believe in politics. They no longer believe in politicians. They don't vote. And yet still there is some people who are frustrated enough to go in the street. Listening to interviews, it's very interesting when you see these people who are retired, yellow vest, and you ask them, why are you in the street? And they say, because the future for our children and grandchildren is very bleak. Where is the hope? They're fighting towards what? And the right, the conservative media, all the media, the mainstream media in France have been very keen on saying, well, accusing the left to try co-opting the movement of the yellow vest, and the left saying, of course not, and the yellow vest saying, no, of course we're not going to be co-opted. But the reality is that there is no one offering a carrot, offering an objective, a goal of the political movement that is not just the end of bad things happening to oneself, but the hope for something else. And this something else remains to be articulated. And it's difficult at this point to say, what is it going to be like? What are we fighting for? Okay, I'm no longer voting. I'm having a hard time. I don't want to, I have my kids, I don't want to do politics, and I'm not going to go read, Hegel's logic to figure out, the dialectics of Marx, and I'm not going to go read, the 50 volumes of Lenin. No, I'm a working guy. Why would I join a party? I'm exhausted. Things are not good. The future is not particularly exciting. Why? Why should, and that's the pitfall. Now, what do we put on the table? What hope, what are we giving the people to give them hope, to give them the desire to actually not just join, but hopefully to become active politically? There has to be a reason. You cannot tell people who are exhausted, beat, insecure, depressed, anxious, because they don't know how they're going to make ends meet next month, to now, on top of this, come and join and fight. They will join and fight, but for reasons. In the same way, when the communists, when Sankara took power, there was a whole program. What we're going to do now with agriculture, with men, with women, how we're going to organize production, and how we're actually going to do it. And that's, to me, the importance of presenting a picture of socialism as a functioning system, not just as an idea of how it could be, not an idea on paper, but in reality. How are we going to create wealth together? And when I say wealthy, I'm not referring to buying a yacht. I'm referring to have a good life, namely where you have the dignity of your work, where you're proud of the work you do, where you don't have to worry about having a home or not, where you don't worry about your kids' education, You don't have to worry about your retirement. You don't have to worry about healthcare if you fall sick. You don't have to worry if your car suddenly breaks down that you're going to lose your job. No, you're not going to worry that you're forced to go to work unless you're threatened to lose your job, like not too long ago in Amazon. No, I'm saying to bring up the hope. It's not just putting an end to exploitation. It's to create something new and not just theoretical, something very productive in every sense, not just at the level of socialization and nationalization of the means of production, but for human beings who are going to be engaged in that production. And I think, Michal, I don't know, but in the States, the rate of people being depressed is huge. People are very, very down. And it's very difficult to be excited about the future when you're down, when you're depressed. You feel extremely alone, and alienation has been extremely prevalent more and more. I think that they've done the conservative, the reactionary forces have done a very good job at dividing people, of creating this pseudo dialectic between a right and an extreme right, where the workers are even more alienated and even more or less inclined to participate. I think that's the left has to put itself into question how to reach the people. To fight the system, to fight the injustice, to fight exploitation is not enough. I think we have, at least in the States, fighting against racism, fighting against mass incarceration, fighting against violence, fighting about, disenfranchised communities who are completely excluded from the market. Fighting all this is one thing, but what do we put instead of these realities, these terrible realities that, as I was telling you earlier, are completely normal? Exploitation, imperialism, exclusion of communities, racism, labor division and discrimination. These are just normal practices of capitalism as it is supposed to function. And we should not expect capitalism to do anything else. They're being very consistent, I would say, since the 19th century to today. They have been extremely predictable and consistent. One thing, they've been extremely sophisticated in making us disavow the reality which we know to be, to convince us that reality is not what we know. It's something else. We know that reality. I think that most people, the yellow vest, the farmers in India, everybody knows now how it works. And yet there is something that prevents this mobilization. And my sense is that it's the challenge is to help people overcome the feeling of alienation, loneliness, depression. Nobody there is going to help me. In the end, I will be alone holding the house. That's what people worry about. I think the people have been betrayed by politicians so often. They've been told things that never pan out, that never happen. So in the end, people have no expectations. They withdraw. And then we're like struggling to try to mobilize people who are exhausted. Namely, it's as if you were telling a marathon runner at the end of the race to say, hey, let's go for a little run. No, he's exhausted, wants to lay down and rest and eat and recover. And people are exhausted. And capitalism has seen to it. That's in its force. So we have to introduce a curative dimension, I think, to try to inject, and I'm not sure what the strategy might be, hope. We have to bring back hope.
So,
What? Yes, go ahead, Michal.
So I think that to speaking about socialism and giving hope from Polish perspective, it's we don't need to be utopian and saying about something which didn't existed, but promote these solutions which already existed in Poland before counter-revolution. So you gave example of the yacht. that yacht from the Western perspective is something which is reserved for the people very, very rich, for the people like Jeff Bezos, or I don't know. It is something, it is the one of the symbol of the luxury, and it is and people who are in France, and they earning the minimal wages, uh, most of this tourism, it's something which is reserved for the upper class. In socialist Poland, there was a reality like this, that every worker have to write to the uh, holiday which was organized by the state or by the factory where he works. And for example, in north of Poland, there is a place named Mazury. It is the place where is the thousands of the lakes. And these lakes are connected
Hmm.
naturally or by the canal. Uh, and there was a lot of places where there was a hotel, maybe not luxury hotel, but hotel for the workers. And the yacht was everybody can rent yacht for very cheap
Hmm.
money. When I was a baby, I was in the yacht like this with my uncle. Me and my brother, we have photo in this yacht. And it is something very, very easy to organize, to in the to organize the tourism like this, tourism for the workers from all the country.
Hmm.
Today in the same place, they are the yacht, but the Mazuri is reserved for the people very, very rich. And the same question is in the mountain in the tourism
Hmm. Hmm.
industry, and that before it was for everybody, today it's for only for the elites.
So why do you think that the lower class do not? Is there? I mean, the question is: there a nostalgia among the working class in Poland for such times?
There are a nostalgia for some things. For example, the forest in the time of socialism was the state property, and everybody can go to forest to do what they want to do
Hmm.
in forest, make
Yes.
sport. I don't know, take mushrooms or stuff like this.
Picnics, activities. Yes.
Yes, 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 yes. Now, the land of Poland is privatized,
Hmm.
and the best things in Poland, the best forest, the best mountains, the best lakes are the private property of rich guys. And it is something that, in Poland you have very strong anti-communist propaganda. So if you speak with somebody and say, "What do you think about the past, about socialism?" He says, "I hate socialism." And what do you think about the privatization of the forest? It's scandal. The forest have to be the state property. Yes, but it was in the time socialism. Yes, I didn't knew this. And in every question, when you say, for example, now in the 2020, when there was a COVID, the Poland is one of the worst example how they manage this crisis of COVID. And it is the crisis of the hospitals in Poland.
Hmm.
And the people are angry why it's not working, why they are not people who work, because the half of the people who need to work in Polish hospitals, they are working in Germany, in Norway, in France, or I don't know where. But we have a mass emigration of people who studied in Poland medicine, but because of the very low salaries, they emigrated.
Mhm.
And they were pushed to emigration. One of the minister a few years ago, when there was one of the strike of the nurses in Poland, he said, if you are not happy, you can emigrate. And they emigrated. And now we have COVID, and people are asking questions, why Poland
Where are the
produce.
doctors?
Yes, yes. Where are the doctors? And we have schools. We have thousands of people who finish these schools, and in the time when the Polish society needs these people, they are not here.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, yes. I mean, this is always better somewhere else. I mean, France had a brain drain in mathematics, where a lot of mathematicians left to come to the States to study in computer firms, because they could make a lot more money doing coding and computer things. Um, but that's where it's a remarkable. At least there is discontent. That they still think that privatization is wrong. They may think that socialism was bad, but they think that privatization is wrong. So you have somebody to work with. You can
Yes, yes.
remind.
But the funny question is that if you have you will discuss with some Polish guy, and you have the question like this privatization of the forest, but there are many other questions like this, and he will agree with you. If you there's the but he will agree with you, and he will discuss with you until the moment that you will not say that you are communist. When you say that I am communist and I want to make this society which existed before back, no, this I don't like.
Well, you don't want to recreate what was. You don't want that. You can't. You know what the story. You can't swim twice in the same river. you know that's that's Heraclitus. But the fact is that today's socialism in Poland will not be what it was. It will
Yes,
be
of course, of
socialism,
course.
but that's the important reality. The socialism today in France will not be what it could have been in 1955. It's times aren't changing, and this is a complicated part to really understand the present condition without falling into some kind of idealism to create a socialism for the future. That's always the big challenge. Uh, what is going to be put on the table? What are the communists? What are we offering? And it's not going to be what it was. It's not going to be what we would like it to be. It's going to be something else. That's something else that's to be constructed. Namely, one thing that would be interesting to look at, and I don't know anything about it, Michal, but to look at Polish socialism before the counter revolution and see what worked and what did not work. Namely, to always have a self critical analysis of our own views of socialism. You know, I think that's a big challenge. It was not perfect. It was not. There has been mistake made. There has to be. These mistakes have to be understood. It's not enjoyable, but that's the idea of self-criticism, to correct the path. I mean, Lenin was very clear at some point. I forgot where he says economically before he implanted the new political economy, where he said we went too fast. We wanted to go too fast. And so there has to be of course, a critique of others, but also a critique of oneself, of one's own views, and to make sure that we correct things, we correct the path given circumstances that will be changing in the future. So in that sense, to socialism in Poland or in France or anywhere else today cannot be the same as what it would have been 50 years ago.
Yes, but from Polish perspective, I think that this answer what was not working is easy, because we can compare Poland with other socialist state. And for example, there was a few things which was changed in Poland in the after the 1956. When the Gomułka take a power, first thing which he first the decision very important was stopping the collectivization of Polish agriculture, and second things he stopped the politic of declericalization of Poland.
Mhm.
And if we compare the Poland, for example, with East Germany, we see that in East Germany the agriculture was totally collectivized, and there was never problem with with vegetables, with meat, with fruit
Mhm.
in these shops. So it is a proof that socialism in East Germany worked well. In Poland, we have this problem because there was a lot of agriculture which was in private hand, and it is the example that this market socialism in agriculture in Poland didn't work, and it is why it was a time in 1980s when we have shortage of food. Second
Mhm.
thing is the Catholic Church in Czech Republic, which the history of Czech Republic and history of Poland are very similar. We are neighbors. We have very similar language, but in Czech Republic, this is the society almost atheist. Nobody
Mhm.
in Czech go to church today, and they are going there to tourist reason, but they are not very they don't believe in God anymore. In Poland, we had all this Catholic reaction in 1970s, in 1980s with the Pope and stuff like this. When the million, if when the party stopped this politic of fighting with the Catholic Church, it's provoked, and the next generation of workers became fanatic Catholics, and the Catholic religion was one of the most important factor to push these workers to contra-revolution.
That's where, I mean, you introduce, I think, beside my his proposal that's somewhat maybe a bit naive, but nevertheless, I think pertinent to restore hope. But I think that one of the big issues is not just in general the counter-revolution or reactionary forces that impede the transformation, the transition to socialism. I think there are also, like you pointed out, cultural and historical aspect. Because obviously in Poland, Catholicism was associated with reactionary forces, whereas for better or for worse, in some ways in Latin America, with liberation theology, a segment of the Catholic Church did associate itself with progressive and socialist and communist forces. So that's why when you have Chavez in Venezuela, who is profoundly Catholic, in the United States, I can think of a young Marxist Leninist who is profoundly religious. He may belong to a Protestant church. Again, how this element, this aspect of a society, a culture, and these historical determinants, not just in terms of political economy, come into play is not easy. I mean, these are very interesting matters, but also this must be taken into consideration, namely, as a communist in Poland, what to do with the religious variable. If you're going to impose, I imagine here from a sociological perspective, if you come in and you say, really impose religion, repression, or you say no, everybody's an atheist now. No, how you going to negotiate, manage this reality of the Polish people, which, from what you're telling me, historically have always been tied to Catholicism?
I would like to say that tomorrow at 9 p.m. I will talk with comrade Ramiro Sebastian Funes.
I'm
He
in communication with him. Yes.
yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
So, but I will present him to the viewers, who don't know him.
Excellent.
So he this is the comrade who came from Honduras,
Hmm.
and also he published a lot of videos about the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua.
Hmm.
So tomorrow we will talk a lot about this revolution in Nicaragua, especially because the similarities of the Latin America and Poland. It is the region where is the very popular Catholic religion.
Hmm.
And also, I would like to know how it is possible that in Poland the Catholic Church it is reactionary force, and in Nicaragua the Catholic religion is progressive
Progressive.
force.
Yes.
Yes.
That this, you see, to me, these are very interesting questions that internationally, communists can benefit from experiences and support each other in the evolution and transformation of socialism in their own, given their own conditions, historical, cultural, and economical. But I think that that's a fantastic discussion to have, you know.
From Polish perspective today, it's for me something unimaginable how I can collaborate with the Catholic Church. So I don't know if it is possible, but I am waiting for this explanation what Comrade Ramiro will propose to the Polish communists.
Well, I know in France at some point in the 70s they were left wing priests, even priests that entered, who were themselves communist. That created problem in relationship to the church, but there was a left wing movement. I think also in the struggle against fascism during World War II, there was clearly um, the common enemy, namely the occupier, the Nazi occupier, was when forced these different fractions to face that reality. In the same way in Germany during World War II, you had a fairly powerful Catholic resistance against the Nazis. I mean, I forgot the name of the network, the White Rose. I forgot the name. Beside, of course, the communist resistance, but that's going
Yes,
to
but
be Hmm?
in Poland, I remember that in 1990s there was some of the Catholic priests. 1990s in Poland, it was a very tragic time when we have mafia-style capitalism, privatization, and explosion of the poverty in Poland. So the people, in one day, they became very poor. Very often they became homeless, unemployed, and in this time, the the small minority in Catholic Church organized this action to make something to eat to these people, to organize them, help them. But I think I'm not living in Poland now, but I think that uh, this activity of Catholic Church is finished. That now Catholic Church is the organization only interested about the property, because it's very rich institution in Poland.
Mhm.
There is a guy named Tadeusz Rydzyk, and he has his medium empire. He has a radio, television, university, and he's very rich guy, and he's a radical fanatic. He's much worse than the official Catholic Church. But he is very popular in Poland. So especially today when we have the Pope Francis, who is a little leftist, and he criticized this Pope Francis that he's not a real pope, he's a communist, he shake hand with Evo Morales or with other leftists.
Mhm.
So we need true Catholic Church which is anti-communist. And
Well, you know, I think I forgot the name of this author who wrote a book called the Spiritual Industrial Complex, and to show that how religion in all its excesses, or what some have called religious fascism, which come in different colors, of course, and has never been contradictory with capitalism. And I'm thinking of many uh, churches in the United States, that are very conservative, very right wing, and very close to fascist ideas, in terms of supremacy, in terms of the concept of the family, in terms of their relationship to sexuality, extremely rigid and quite racist. But you have the same thing in India, with the Hindutva and their communal violence against anybody who is not Hindu, and which many Indian Marxists have called Indian fascist. And you have an equivalent now with a new movement. I forgot the exact name of it in Pakistan, where they just recently killed a manager for blasphemy, which had nothing to do with it, where they're quasi, extreme right wing Muslim groups. So you can see that I think the rise in right wing populism that you witness in France, or quite completely right wing, quasi fascist in the Ukraine and so on, you see everywhere. I mean, you have the whole Bolsonaro in Brazil. You have all this. The more it seems capitalism is facing a crisis economically, and the difficulty to bounce its own functioning in light of COVID and the economic downturn and its regular cyclical crises, you can see a rise of the extreme right. So, of course, Catholicism is not going to be exempt of being a platform for expressing these extreme right, extremely reactionary ideas, and it's going to come in all sort of colors throughout the world. That's the sense I have, but it doesn't facilitate the struggle of socialist, communist, and progressive forces, in that it completely shifts the political struggle between to the right, having the extreme right struggling against the neoliberal right, such as in France between Zemmour or Le Pen and Macron, or in the US between Biden, and Trump. Uh, so I think that it's really speaks to a state of crisis in general, and that is fosters promote the hopelessness for workers, for regular folks, basically, and that is the very ground upon which Marxist-Leninist, and communists can bring up hope. It's a struggle. I'm not saying it's easy. Huh? I'm not saying that's because, like, you're right. What this right and this extreme right have in common is a very staunch, very powerful, very ingrained anti-communism, where the whole anti-communism, the Cold War is back. But, like, I like what Bruno says. On the one hand, they tell us communism is dead, but on the other, they're still more anti-communist than ever. So it's really an indication, a symptom that in fact communism is not dead, that it's very much there, and they fear it. Even though the various communist parties are weak, even though the communists are not in the street in mass, even though the communists are not at the fair selling magazine, even though the communists are a very small group everywhere, they fear the communists still. So it tells you what that is the answer to their problem.
Comrade Adrian in the chat remind us that today we have birthday of the comrade Stalin. And what do you think about Comrade Stalin? It is my first question. And if you support Comrade Stalin, do you think that to promote socialism, it is good idea to speak openly with the people about Stalin, or it's better to not give his example because of this all this anti-communist propaganda and against Stalin?
Well, I think that we need to go to history. We cannot deny history. The reality of it is that Stalin, who, from what I've read, is very much respected in the Soviet Union. I mean, sorry, was, but in Russia, even has better, get more respect than Gorbachev, who is hated, even in the Federation of Russia, which is not socialist. But Stalin was the great savior of the struggle against fascism. That is not that's not an opinion. That's the reality of history. When we go to the complexities of the Moscow trial and the plot to kill Stalin by Trotsky, and when we go about the Gulag and all these matters, I say let's look at archives. Let's look at historians. I'm thinking of the work of, what's his name? I mean, there is a work of Grover Furr, in the United States, that it's not a question of liking Stalin or disliking Stalin. I don't know Stalin. I don't know who Stalin was as a man. I only know the historical character and his function and his writing. And some of his writing are very interesting. Some of it are not. But again, that's to me. I'm not going to condemn Stalin. I think we should talk about Stalin. There is no doubt that it's not a question of marketing, of perception, of sounding like. No, it's a question of history. You look at history as it is. It's not a matter of opinion. Then there is, if you really want to know, that's when you have specialist historians who are able to read Russian correctly, to go to archives, to look at the material, to look at the fact, and then we reach conclusions. It's not a matter of, if you do you like the Beatles or not. That's a matter of opinion. Some people prefer the Rolling Stone, at least in my generation. That's not the case with Stalin. It's not a question of marketing. Should we, what should we change the word communism because there is too much anti-communism and use another word? No, let's stay realistic, grounded in history. That's my position on Stalin. As to his text, well, again, so I'm reading his text in French or in English, but I don't read Russian. It's probably would be the way to read Stalin's text and analyze them and understand them. And again, in the context in which they were written, the time they were written, understanding the intricacies and the politics of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union at the time. And these are not simple issues. I mean, it requires a lot of uh, studying and understanding. So, yeah, we should speak about Stalin. Of course, we should. As we should speak about Lenin, as we should speak about Dimitrov, as we should speak about a lot of people. All the people that have studied, thought, reflected, struggled on the ideas of Marxism and Leninism in all its variations. And we should read, we should read Lumumba, we should read Ben Bella, and we should read, all the people who have struggled and fought, and some have given their lives to, in fact, having the hope for a better world.
I respect Stalin firstly for his attempts to build the first socialist state, and it was very difficult in the time of the NEP in Russia when we have this class of kulaks. So one of the best things which Stalin made was a dekulakization of the Soviet Union, and it is very actual from the perspective of today China, because we have this problem in China that we have the market socialism, and I think that China is in the similar situation when was the Soviet Union in 1927 1928, when there was a new class of the individual kulaks, which starting to be pretend to be new ruling class, and this all these problems with the agriculture in Soviet Union was because of the strike of the kulaks. And I fear that one day the billionaires in China, they will try to make, I don't know, attacked party, make a contra-revolution. And I hope that the chairman Xi Jinping, he will make similar thing when with these billionaires in China, what Stalin make with the kulaks.
Well, I think that you're. I mean, to comment or to speak to what you say, I think that's true. That's China. What I've read, what I've listened to, is has to deal with this new class, this capitalist class, which for now does not have access to the institutions of power. And I think that's paramount that they're still under the ruling, in so to speak, in quote unquote, of the Chinese government and Chinese institutions, but so far they have had no access to political power, and that's paramount. China, I tell you, uh, I'm very reluctant to speak about China because, like I told you earlier, it's a very large country, and uh, as I wrote somewhere else, wrote a little note that you take the population of the United States, of Russia, of the EU, and you get a number that's still 250 million people short of the population of China. So it's really a very, very large country uh, that is functioning. It's very difficult to have access to the literature in terms of the critical literature in various departments, either academic or cities, because, well, if you don't speak or if you don't read Mandarin, you're very, very limited to understanding what's going on in China, where there is a lot of production, a lot of reflection, a lot of Marxist studies department, universities, and town. And there is a lot of ideas being produced, what I've gathered, yet it's very difficult to have access to them. And what I've read about China is always written by either translation of what's available. I'm thinking of what I've read about Cheng Hanfu, who is the chairman of, I think, the World Association of Political Economy, or other books by French or American Marxists who have spent time in China, have access to Chinese scholarship, but it's very difficult. It's a really, really, really big country. I'm very, very shy about saying I think China is this or that. In the sense that there are a lot of experiments economically, both with markets, but also with cooperatives in terms of production. So, when you say a small group, a small town in China, how many people is that? When you say a small town in France or in Poland or in the United States, so.
I will comment the things which are in chat now because there is a discussion about Stalin.
Mhm.
So I will read first what's the discussion and say my comment. Yevgeny Ostroumov, but his work in Russian, but is highly documentary in detail. Adrian, Stalin work is quite blunt, precise, and to the point, so I think that not much must be lost in translation due to the simplicity of his work, but learning Russian is always fun. Yeah, Stalin wrote in very easy language because Russian not his native language. There was this one guy called it is something different. Uh, I would like to say that maybe one of the reason why the works of Stalin are easy is of course that Russian was not his native language, But I think also that it is very important his religious education, that he was in the religious school, and in this religious school they learn, they teach the people how to speak to the people, and it is totally
Mm.
different than the education of Karl Marx, because the education of Karl Marx was the philosophic education in the German philosophy, when these old German philosophers like Kant, like Hegel, and others, they're using the phrase or the language which is not. It is language for the elite and not for the mass people. And Marx, he want or he don't want, but language very often which are using by Marx is this philosophic language, which is sometimes very difficult for the workers. With Stalin, it is other things. His education was the religious education and how to speak for the not educated people. So it is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why the reading of Stalin, it can be one of the first step of the learning of the Marxist theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that his book on Leninism is it's a lot easier to understand. I mean, what I have read, I I agree, and at the same time, I'm very impressed by by looking at this biographical aspect of these revolutionaries, introduce a whole new dimension to the character that make the character more interesting. Namely, you can see that they're not just born ex nihilo, but there is a tradition, there is an education um, that allows certain things versus not, such as if Stalin, through his education, found the means to communicate to the people in a more appropriate way in order to be understood, in opposition to Marx, who had a very fairly heavy philosophical tradition, and which even makes his work at times very difficult to translate, especially when he was writing in German. So, and you find that among highly educated Indian Marxists who come from upper classes, who are so sophisticated that their texts are difficult to read because their intellectual appraisal is very, very, very accurate and acute and difficult, and take into consideration variables that cannot allow for simplification. On the other hand, you have to have writing, like you said. So that's one more reason to describe the importance of Stalin then is the simpler aspect of his explanation of revolutionary thinking. So I think that's something to put forward, you know, about Stalin, not so much always a stereotype, but to say, well, let's forget about the man. Let's read what he says, and we'll go with, is it interesting or not? Is it true or not? Is it pertinent or not? Again, to go with the material text of Stalin is what is of interest. In this case, I think it's fascinating to hear this.
Yes, and I want to add that very often Stalin is presented like a guy who only repeated the things which Lenin said before. But Bruno, in one of the lecture here, said a very interesting thing about this theory of the nations which existed in Soviet Union. That this theory was created by Stalin, and Lenin, after he takes somebody this theory from Stalin to, and all this politic of the Koreanization of to create these nations in Soviet Union, which most of these nations didn't have their own language, literal language, and create the national republic in Soviet Union. It was something which the origin of this, it is the work of Stalin in the 1913, 1914, when he are studied this national question in the Marxist theory in the Austrian Marxist writings, that in Austrish Empire it was also the empire where was a lot of nations, so they also work in this case. And this is why Lenin he decided that Stalin will be the commissaire for the national question in Soviet Union.
And that's, you know, that's, I'd love to hear more about this, because this issue, especially nowadays in the United States, with especially the Black community and the national question for this, what some refer to the eternal colony. And I'm thinking about Africans, Americans who spent time in the Soviet Union, like Harry A. Wood, and came up with ideas such as a black belt, which would have been a black nation within the United States, which I think Stalin supported at the time, but eventually was not feasible for many reasons. But again, I think that all these texts need to be discussed and exposed openly, and be the topic of discussions. Um, I am sure, and I know so, that in the Soviet Union, even later on, there were so many writing on linguistic issues, cultural issues, anthropological issues, issues of interethnic discussions, and materialist analysis. There is so many authors, I'm convinced, that never heard of, and did publish and did discuss and did address these issues. In the same way, I've discovered, and I don't have their names, but in China, many philosophers, and I'm not talking medieval China, I'm talking contemporary China, how many opinions and discussions and debates about history and cultures, and these are like nonstop. But again, we don't have access to this material. We're only limited to this sort of like, Euro-American bourgeois kind of representation of discussions. But I think that then, if, taking Stalin as a foundation to introduce a conversation on these issues, I think that talk about, celebrating Stalin's birthday, this is a place. This is a place to start from.
Okay, comrade, and there is no many time which left.
Mhm.
Could you tell if some viewers want to have contact with you or collaborate with you, where they can find you?
This is difficult because I'm a clinician. I see patients, and therefore I try to keep a low profile, because um, there are other reasons, political reasons, but I want to be respectful that the people I see are not necessarily of my persuasion or what I think and what matters to me, and I have to respect those differences. I don't know if you're familiar with Hakim, this Iraqi Marxist
Yes,
Leninist.
yes, yes. I know
He
him.
also has to preserve a degree of anonymity, and for clinical reasons. So it's very important that I do the same. Um, if what you could do is maybe through you, Michal, if they can contact you and then you can contact me, would that work?
Okay, okay, not problem. I know this question from Polish perspective, because my main activity it is the building communist movement in Poland, and I have my YouTube channel in Polish language where I present myself, but it is easy for me because I am living in France. My comrades from Poland, many of them don't want to show their faces, because Poland it is already we have the repressions, state repressions against communists, but also we have very strong radical anti-communist movement, far
Yes,
right,
yes,
and it is more danger than the state.
yes. So I will be glad, but
Mm,
especially, yeah, if they contact you
mm.
and you send me their information, I will be glad to enter in contact with people. I think more and more we have to make use of this new technology, the internet, that we've been forced to use because of COVID in part. but to capitalize on that if we can, to maintain communication. It's so easy. I mean, it's quite amazing. I speak to comrades in New York, in France, in Pakistan. You really, tonight there is a symposium on political economy in Shanghai, and so we have to make use of it to understand, especially for people who feel alienated, isolated, who don't have the possibility to attend a large crowd, or a mass party that is officially legal. Then to connect is very important. That's all.
Okay, thank you, comrades. I will finish recording, but don't go. I want to speak with you
Okay.
without.